Peace and greetings. Welcome to the BIPOC Leaders Share Food Sovereignty Strategies panel. My name is Leah Penniman. I use all pronouns, and I'm honored to be moderating this conversation with our incredible panelists, Rowen White, Reverend Heber Brown, and my dear sister, Leah Penniman. Before I introduce them, I will share a little about myself and where we're headed. I am the daughter of Reverend Adele Smith Penniman, Haitian Black American spiritual leader and civil rights activist, and Keith Penniman, an environmental activist and librarian of European descent. And like so many of you, I am a lifelong lover and defender of the earth, devoted to healing and justice for all her inhabitants, and am giving my all to do my small part. I'm honored to serve as program director at Soulfire Farm, an Afro-Indigenous community training farm, and also a founding member of Wild Seed Community Farm and Healing Village. I'm also an artist and poet. You may have heard my poetry before my sister Leah Penniman's soul-stirring keynote that still has me swirling with conviction and possibility. I've been part of Bioneers for several years, and I'm incredibly grateful for this community of visionary solutionaries. I want to give a warm, heartfelt welcome to everyone who is listening, and thank you for taking time to show up and listen in to this important discussion. I'm thrilled that we're having this conversation today about strategies for food sovereignty, which is deeply connected to seed sovereignty and deeply connected to land sovereignty. Because figuring out how we nourish all members of our communities in a time of immense food insecurity, how we feed ourselves without trashing the planet, how we restore Black and Indigenous land stewardship, how we create safety and dignity and pathways to leadership for Latinx agricultural laborers who grow the majority of the food we eat in this country, and how we restore and protect a diversity of seeds for future generations are all intrinsic to our collective survival and the health of our shared planet. And if there was ever a time where the cracks in our industrial food system is laid bare, it is now. We need to be living into the solutions, and we need to be taking the lead from Black, Indigenous, and other people of color on the front lines, whose labor and brilliance has too often been ignored, exploited, subjugated, and co-opted in defining pathways forward. I have immense respect and gratitude to each of our panelists for their enduring devotion and leadership in these realms, and I will introduce them one at a time and then pass it to them for brief opening words. I'm so excited to be in this virtual space with Rowen White, who is a seed keeper and farmer from the Mohawk community of Akwesasne and a passionate activist for Indigenous seed and food sovereignty. Rowen is the founder and director of Sierra Seeds, an innovative California-based organic seed stewardship organization, and she is also the program director for the Indigenous Seed Keeper Network, which is an initiative of the Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance. Welcome, Rowen, and thank you for being here.
Sego, Seguego, Ganyat Dahawe, Yungyats. Greeting relatives. My name is Rowan White. My Mohawk name is Ganyat Dahawe, which means she carries the snow. I'm a farmer, as Naima said. I'm a farmer. I'm a seed keeper. I'm a mother. I'm a storyteller, and a passionate activist for the dignified resurgence of our kin-centric and relational foodways as Indigenous peoples. I come from a small community called Akwesasne, which is right on the New York-Canadian border. In fact, the border crossed us, so to speak. We have relatives to the north and south of that medicine line, and we've been in relationship with the land here on Turtle Island since time immemorial. And so I've apprenticed myself to the earth, my ancestors, my living elders, to my children, and to the amazing network of people that I have the honor and privilege of working with, to work on finding my way home, back to a sense of what it means to be a modern Indigenous farmer and woman who is both good future ancestor and a responsible descendant. So it's a real honor to be here amongst so many wise visionaries and good people here. So Nyawa, thank you.
Thank you so much, Rowan. And I'm honored to introduce Reverend Heber Brown, who is a multiple award-winning community organizer and social entrepreneur. He is the senior pastor of Pleasant Hope Baptist Church in Baltimore, Maryland, and the founding director of Arita's Cross Freedom School, which works to reconnect Black youth to their African heritage while providing them with hands-on learning opportunities to spark their creativity and build vocational skills. In 2015, Reverend Brown launched the Black Church Food Security Network, a multi-state alliance of congregations dedicated to creating a grassroots community-led food system. Reverend Brown, thank you for your work and thank you for being here. I pass it to you.
Thank you so very much. And we could just push rewind on Rowan's introduction. Just the introduction alone, me snapping and taking notes and everything else. So I'm honored. Thank you, Rowan, and to all of you. I'm grateful for the invitation to be a part of this conversation. As was shared, I'm blessed to be the pastor of Pleasant Hope Baptist Church, a third-generation Baptist preacher, and returning grower. This year has slowed me down enough to invest in the quality time that I needed, my soul needed with the land, even as we do the important work of the Black Church Food Security Network, which essentially is working to remember the Black church to our agrarian and land-based legacies, and in addition, organize and marshal the resources of Black church spaces in the direction of Black food and land sovereignty. There's a long history there. And so I'm excited about ways that our team can steward that history and also in kind of an Afrofuturist kind of way, look on how to build an additional room on that legacy as well. So I'm really grateful to be here.
Thank you so much. I'm really grateful you're here too. And now I have the honor to introduce Leah Penniman, who I can testify is a phenomenal sibling, in addition to being an incredible mother, daughter, and ancestor in training. Leah is the co-director and farm manager at Soulfire Farm and has over 20 years experience as a soil steward and food sovereignty activist. She's worked at the Food Project, Farm School, Many Hands Organic Farm, Youth Grow, and with farmers internationally in Ghana, Haiti, and Mexico. Leah co-founded Soulfire Farm a decade ago with the mission to reclaim our inherent right to belong to the earth and to have agency in the food system as Black and Brown people. Leah's areas of leadership at Soulfire include farmer training, international solidarity, perennials, writing, speaking, making it rain, and anything that involves heavy lifting, sweat, and soil. And her book, Farming While Black, is a love song for the earth and her peoples. Welcome, Leah.
Thank you, dear womb and soul sister, for that introduction. And thank you, Reverend Brown and Sister Rowan. I have a deep, heartfelt respect for both of you and all that you have taught me, both through our relationship and through your example in the world. So I'm so happy to be here with you. And Naima, I was going to say pretty much the exact same thing you said about our parents. So I'm going to extend the calling of lineage by inviting in this moment also Mary Jane Boyd, our grandma's grandma, and her grandmother, Susie Boyd, who was one of the thousands of Dahomey women who had the audacious courage to braid seeds of okra, cowpea, millet, black rice, egusi into her hair before being forced onto a transatlantic slave ship, believing that we would exist to inherit the seed. And also want to call in Grandma Me, Brownlee McCullough, who's the baby here in this picture, who is one of the 6 million Black folks who were refugees in the Great Migration, fleeing the white racial terror that dispossessed them of lands, as well as the discrimination by our own federal government. And what Grandma Me did to hold on to the agrarian tradition that she had learned in Rock Hill, South Carolina, was to keep a strawberry patch and a crabapple tree in her yard on the outskirts of Boston. And that is where Naima and I first learned to garden and first learned to preserve our own food and to listen to what the earth had to tell us. And so big shout out and much gratitude to our lineage. I was reminiscing with Naima yesterday about when we were very, very small children, how we thought that we had invented a religion of earth reverence. And among our spiritual practices was to go outside and hug grandmother pine and imagine that our exhale of CO2 would be absorbed by her and returned to us as oxygen. And that in this embrace, we would have a mutually supportive exchange of life-giving gases. This is, 4 and 5-year-old Naima and Leah. And while our activism has matured, I guess you could say, and become more strategic in terms of the ways that we engage with policy and institution building and healing from trauma and frontlines work, that fundamental yearning for intimate connection with the earth remains unabated. And I'm excited to talk about that with y'all today.
Ashe, thank you, Leah, for drumming up those memories and for calling upon our ancestors. And we call upon all of our ancestors to support us in these beautiful and challenging conversations that we're about to enter into. May they help to guide us. I give thanks to my ancestors, to your ancestors, to all of our ancestors. Ashe.
Ashe.
So I'm going to start it off with a question for each of you. And this is a big question. What is wrong with the food system? And what are some of the strategies and community solutions that you are engaged in to intervene? And I'll pass it to you to answer first, Rowan, and then you can pass it to whoever you feel called.
Great. Yeah, well, thank you. This is a big question. I think all of us ask big questions here in the circle, which is a blessing and a curse sometimes, but I think we find our way through this through the hope that this work brings. I'm here representing Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance, which is a national organization. And there are over 560 unique tribal nations across Turtle Island with so many magnificent and exquisite kin-centric relational foodways. And each and every single one of these communities has endured this ongoing assault of the violence of settler colonialism that has resulted in catastrophic land loss, cultural memory loss, dislocation, assimilation, acculturation, and genocide. But amidst that, there have been countless, endless, and they're standing behind us, they're around us now, countless courageous ancestors and foresighted elders who tucked seeds into smoky buckskin pouches when they were put on trails of tears and relocated from the lands that held their umbilical cords and their ancestors' bones and bodies, and shared this cultural memory and these seeds down the generations in subversive and revolutionary ways, because we as Indigenous peoples, we are woven into a tapestry of story and identity. And we're nothing without our sense of who we are, of the foods we eat, the relationships that we have to those who sustain us. And so we've endured countless atrocities over the last 500 plus years. But these ancestors that I speak of and invoke and call in, they sowed seeds of resilience and vitality into the very blood and bones and earth of our bodies. And some of those memories and those seeds and those prayers have lain dormant inside of us over the last many decades and centuries, carried down, like I said, through the very marrow in our bones and the sweet water in our spines, and have animated us in this time to move towards dignified resurgence. And that's what I call it. That's what we all are collectively working on, is this dignified resurgence. And those seeds are finally sprouting in this time. We're seeing young people, old people, a multi-generational movement of Indigenous seed keepers and fishermen and foragers and hunters coming together, knowing that our strength is in our ability to restore those vital kinship and trade routes, those intertribal connections, when some of the violence of the colonial tools was to divide and conquer, was to make us infight and break us down in that way. It was a very manufactured, but amidst all of that, we are coming together and rising up. And so through the Alliance, the Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance has been around since 2015, but this is really riding upon a movement that has been sprouting for generations upon generations, and people who have been, again, pushing up against, those adversities. And so what they did was they tucked so much knowledge into the safety of the dark soil until it was ready to sprout. And here we are. And we have this vibrant Indigenous food sovereignty, bubbling up. And so we are working with, this cartography of kinship and trade routes and connections and relationships in a vibrant seed to table approach to really help create mentorship opportunities and to grow the vibrant food sovereignty initiatives that are needed. So we use a number of different tools. Largely our sweet spot of change is to support, empower, and uplift emerging multi-generational leadership that draws on the inherent strength of our ancestral wisdom and traditions, but also embraces the innate resilience and wisdom and dynamic capacity for our peoples to adapt. So we're working with those emerging leaders, teaching them how to host community listening sessions, do seed sovereignty assessments, creating mentorship opportunities, seed to table, where the farmers are connecting with the Indigenous chefs and learning how to grow the food, how to prepare the food, how to share that food in community. We are looking at regenerative Indigenous cooperative economic development models that align with our cultural values instead of having to mold ourselves into the extractive and exploitative model of capitalism. So we are reclaiming indigenomics, as my sister Lila June likes to talk about. Yeah, and so in closing, we say that we often say in our circles that we carry our nations as we carry our children, right? And so at the very center of the work that we do, we center culture, we center spirit, we center emotional, mental, and physical well-being. And so we work together to uplift one another. So that's kind of the work we're doing. And we are catalyzing that inherent resilience and creativity of Indigenous peoples to dream the future of food sovereignty that is in solidarity with our Black and Brown brothers and sisters. So yeah. There we go. Pass it along to, I think, the Reverend, right?
Let's do it.
Now, Rowan, I thought you liked me, Rowan. I thought we were okay. I can't follow you. Listen, I just indigenomics. I got a whole Post-it notes because I just feel like this is about to be amazing. It's already amazing. I appreciate you. So when you asked the question, what's wrong with the food system, my brain did something interesting. My brain actually inverted the question and said, what's right with the food system? If a system is a collection of parts working together to accomplish a goal, and I'd love to sit in circle with you and so many others to explore what those parts are doing to us and what goal is it working toward, and what is the impact of that goal and those parts on ourselves, our families, and our communities. And so the question of what's wrong with the food system feels huge in my mind. The question of what's right with it, automatically something begins to really sharpen and focus for me. Because it's difficult for me to answer what's right with it when I think about the exploitation, when I think about excessive profit over people, when I think about control over others instead of relationship and solidarity with others, when I think about its impact on that system, its impact on the earth, the soil, when I think about the ways in which local communities are suffering down to their personal health, to the health of their families. When I think about the ways that this system has been used as a tool of racism, white supremacy, both here and around the world, and continues to wield tremendous violence upon our various siblings around the world, I got to ask the question, what's right with it? And anytime, and as I am rather studying this system, more and more I learn that gradualist approaches to tweaking and reforming that which is leads to a dead end, leads to a dead end. And so for me, I'm inspired by the idea of so much of what Sister Rowan has shared, warms my heart and inspires our work as well with the Black Church Food Security Network, in that we seek to honor that part of our story that precedes the enslavement of African people. We have a relationship with land and soil and water that precedes our enslavement by Europeans in this country. And I love being in the position as a pastor to create space, not only for the study of that history, but also a re-engagement of sacred scripture. So many in the church read scripture, and we read it with capitalistic, westernized white lenses. And we miss so much of this dynamic agrarian story. That the truth that we preach about, for instance, having faith the size of a mustard seed, we've been preaching and singing about that in Black churches for years. But a whole lot of folks who've heard the sermon or sung the song have never seen and been in contact with the mustard seed. We're in a position with the Black Church Food Security Network to remember and reintroduce and reconnect our folks with that sacred history. And as I said in the beginning, to really to marshal the resources of Black church spaces. I mean, when you think about it, the tradition of Black churches have been in this country for 300 some years, since the late 1700s with the founding of the African Methodist Episcopal Church and independent Black Baptist churches. We've had these spaces, autonomous, economic strength, culture, places of culture and advocacy, and in many respects, a place where we have great distance from the domination of local white power politics and racism, white supremacy. And so we just seek to see what we can do with the kitchens, the land, the church vans, the classrooms that Black churches currently steward, and what it looks like when we are pollinators and connecting all of this together. And so that's what comes to mind for me. And I'm so eager to hear from my sister and sibling, Leah, and what your thought is on the food system.
Oh my goodness. I mean, it's a huge question, right? What is wrong with the food system? I mean, my personal hypothesis is that the food system is working as it was designed, which is to concentrate wealth, power, and resources in the hands of the few at the expense of most of us, and that its DNA is fundamentally stolen land and exploited labor. So we need a complete redesign. But I'm going to share with you a quote that I've been meditating a lot on that has to do with the intersection between the ecological aspect of the food system and the human labor aspect of the food system. And this is a very strong quote from an unlikely source. It's from Wendell Berry. But I ask you to receive it with an open heart and mind, because I think it gets at something very fundamental about what needs to be uprooted in the food system. So here goes. Wendell Berry wrote, "The white man, preoccupied with the abstractions of the economic exploitation and ownership of the land, necessarily has lived on the country as a destructive force, an ecological catastrophe, because he assigned the hand labor, and in that the possibility of intimate knowledge of the land, to a people he considered racially inferior. In thus debasing labor, he destroyed the possibility of meaningful contact with the earth. He was literally blinded by his presuppositions and prejudices. Because he did not know the land, it was inevitable that he would squander its natural bounty, deplete its richness, corrupt and pollute it, or destroy it altogether. The history of the white man's use of the earth in America is a scandal." So I really think that we can't divorce the way we treat the earth and the people of the earth, right? And this is very alive for us right now. I mean, you look at the fact that farm workers, as they're called, who are really agricultural experts, they're farmers who happen to be employees, are 85+% people of color, mostly Spanish speaking, Latinx, Hispanic, born outside the so-called borders of the so-called United States. They're indigenous people. And in this time of COVID, when we say that the people who grow food and process food are essential. What the society is saying is that the labor, the outputs of the labor is essential, but not actually the lives of those who tend and till the earth. You know, we've had over 900 COVID outbreaks in meatpacking and food processing plants. We've had over 200,000 cases of COVID amongst farm workers, high levels of homelessness among farm workers, children out of school going to work in the field with their parents. 50% of farm workers not authorized to work, so they're not receiving the unemployment benefits, they're not receiving the stimulus packages, they're excluded from the free COVID testing by the government. And these are the people of the earth. And so when I think about, you know, what are we doing? I mean, certainly Soul Fire Farm is engaged in the small and humble ways that we can be engaged. We do doorstep delivery of food. We build urban gardens. We're involved in farmer training. We're involved in root cause advocacy and lands back work, justice for Black farmers work. But I think to zoom out beyond what any one individual or one organization is doing, I think to really transform the food system in the ways that we need to, we have to have a holistic picture. And there's a very powerful metaphor for this in the form of the 4 wings of transformative social justice, depicted as a butterfly. And for anyone who is familiar with butterflies and you watch their amazing metamorphosis and their long flight, they cannot do what they do without all 4 of their winglets. They cannot fly. And I think when we talk about social change and social transformation, these 4 wings could be summarized as follows: resist, build, heal, and reform. So resist refers to that direct confrontation of injustice. It's our boycotts, our civil disobedience, our protest, non-cooperation, our walkouts, strikes, non-payment, right? The non-cooperation with oppression. That is resist. We need that wing. We have the wing of reform. These are some of the most courageous folks in some ways, I think, who can do the reform work, because you're going into the belly of the beast, into these institutions to do policy change, to transform our public schools from the inside out, going for elected office, working within the published media with all of its complexities and problematic ways of being, doing equity audits within our own organizations and transforming from within, right? The builders, which is where we at Soul Fire Farm squarely put ourselves, those are the ones who are creating institutions that strive to represent the world that we want to create. That's our freedom schools, our land trusts, our seed saving networks, our co-ops, our churches, our farms, community clinics, sanctuaries. These are, us creating institutions that reflect the best we can do in implementing our values. And then that final winglet is healing, because there's no way we can go through centuries, if not millennia, of land-based oppression and not be scarred, not to carry this trauma in our DNA, and then sometimes to be enacting lateral violence, among ourselves and impeding our own progress. So we need our therapy, our ceremonies, our plant medicines, our story, our art, our vigils, our prayer, all of these aspects of healing. And I think that there is no way that one individual or one organization or one strategy is going to win this. We really need to figure out how to collectively make our butterfly fly.
Yes, thank you so much. Deeply moved by the rich wisdom that you all shared, and feel so uplifted and grateful to be in this work together. So, Reverend Brown, I'd love to pass this question to you first, to hear a story of a specific experience that gave you hope around the power of community-owned or community-controlled food systems. If you can bring us into an experience that really illuminated that, love to hear. Thank you.
Sure. I'll say, I think about one of the ancestors of Pleasant Hope Baptist Church. Her name is Maxine Nicholas. She was a dynamic, and she is a dynamic member of Pleasant Hope Baptist Church. And I'm grateful for, before she transitioned, for what she did to help me to see that the divine spark that was before me was bigger than I even imagined. I had this idea to establish a garden on the 1,500 square feet of our front yard at Pleasant Hope Baptist Church here in Baltimore. I didn't know the first thing about growing anything. But I was so upset, y'all, because I saw members of our church, folks I share life with, going in and out of the hospital for diet-related reasons. And I went down the street to a nutrient-rich food store, and we were priced out of getting anything that they had. And that made me so mad. I still get frustrated thinking about it, because it was right at our fingertips and we could not get what we needed. So I got mad and I came back to the church with that divine discontent. And I saw our front yard in that moment. I said, you know what? Bump them. If we can't afford what they got, guess what? We're going to grow what we need ourselves.
Yes.
And so that's how it started. But look, I didn't know the first thing about how to start. It was the beautiful senior, seasoned saint, as we say in church, Maxine Nicholas, who said, let me help this boy out. He got heart, but he don't know what to do. She grew up in Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina, with a bunch of brothers and sisters on the farm. And she's the one who transformed that space and helped me to see it was so much bigger than what I thought. She took 1,500 square feet and started leading the effort to grow tomatoes and to grow different herbs, to grow okra and so many other things. And what she helped to show me was that there were people right around us. Like, instead of reaching beyond ourselves for the solutions to some of these things, turn to the people that I'm in community with. And I had to clean my lenses and see, well, wow, from an asset-based community development and relational approach, we have what we need. We're here and we're together. And so that's my story. I just want to lift up Maxine Nicholas, just a dynamic ancestor and patron saint of the Black Church Food Security Network.
Ashe. Thank you, Reverend Heber Brown III. Mr. Rowan, could you share a story with us as well? Something that has given you hope?
Absolutely. If someone could help me in the back, just uplift the photo that I shared, because I'd love to bring these folks into the room. Really, what I'd love to, I guess the trellis of hope that I'm leaning on these days is around this work that we are moving towards, which is rematriation. And this is a picture from the Taos Pueblo. This is Henrietta Gomez and the women from the Red Willow farm. These women are forging against all odds, remembering, as the Reverend was talking about, a beautiful kincentric relational food system on the historic Taos Pueblo in New Mexico. And we've been working over the last decade on a project, an intercultural project, where we're working with descendants of people who are, the settler colonist organizations, white folks, and these living descendants of indigenous peoples, and finding out where seeds, our living relatives, many of them are part of our cosmogenealogies, they're relatives that have been with us since the dawning of time. Through displacement and acculturation, these seeds have left our community. The food systems were violently dismantled, and these seeds, by one way or the other, seeds move, and they moved outside of our communities, many of them. And as our women and as our people are having a vision, are hearing the vision from our ancestors that the revitalization of our culture and the revitalization of our foods is inextricable. We're calling on the spirits of these seeds who are like long lost prisoners of war, who've left our communities and who are now being invited to come back home to restore this beautiful sense of continuity, care, and love and respect. And so this was a picture of when we had found an old plant relative from the Taos Pueblo people in a seed bank in Iowa. And it had been there for multiple decades, and it had been long gone from this community. And as we know that the foundation of food sovereignty is seed sovereignty, is having access to culturally significant varieties that nourish our bodies in ways that modern hybrid and genetically modified varieties can't. And so we forged relationships with the folks at Seed Savers and with the Field Museum and with some other entities, some other universities, and we're finding these seeds and bringing them home. And we had this ceremony. It was in October of 2018. It was under a beautiful snow-capped mountain in the fall. And we brought this squash home and a bag of seeds and presented them to the elders at the pueblo there. And as you can see, the reason why I wanted to bring these women into the room is that the emotion is so palpable, and the understanding that those agreements for us, we're bound in a reciprocal relationship with these seeds since time immemorial. And those agreements become rehydrated. They're holding that squash like a baby, because those plants are our relatives. In fact, many of us see us as lineal descendants of those foods who give their life so that we can have life. And so we came into an agreement as Indigenous peoples long time ago that the seeds would take care of us and we would take care of the seeds. And because of countless adversities, it's been difficult to be able to uphold those agreements. And so this rematriation is just a beautiful, magnificent, healing endeavor to really purposefully restore the heart, the spirit, the mother back into our communities, that holy mother wild who wants to nourish and feed and sustain her children and has never forgot her agreement to do that. And so this is part of our people's remembering. It's part of us centering culture and spirit at the heart of this work. And so if you're interested in learning more about our rematriation efforts, we're going to be launching an action guide and a video this winter to share a little bit more about how people of all different diasporic people can be reconnecting to the seeds of their ancestors in this way and begin to rematriate seeds back home. So yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Wow. I think we all need to get involved with and support that. It's reminding me, Sister Rowan, of a piece of our own cosmology, those who are descended from Yoruba people, of the first plants, the tete, which is a type of amaranth, being considered the ancestor of all of us. And that cosmogenealogy is just really resonating and something I want to reflect more deeply on. Let's see, a story. I mean, there's so many stories, right, of hope and resilience. I think something that's really alive for me right now, kind of building off of what you said, Reverend Brown, around like bump them, is that, for so long and continuing, Black farmers in particular have really been in a grapple with the U.S. Department of Agriculture around their long legacy of discrimination and exclusion and hostility. I mean, Pete Daniel writes in his book Dispossession that during the civil rights movement, the USDA programs were sharpened into weapons to punish people for the audacity of registering to vote, right? And we need to continue that struggle, absolutely. And at the same time, I think that there is a generation of folks saying, like, what if we create our own institutions? And in the Northeast, there's this emerging network that we're calling our ecosystem of folks doing Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust, which started in 2017 as a collaboration between Indigenous and Black earth stewards, farmers, seed keepers, who are deeply committed to rematriation of lands in the spirit of land back, and also permanent, secure land tenure for folks of all backgrounds who've been dispossessed. And that is a lot harder than it sounds. I mean, one of the projects of settler colonialism has been divide and distract between our communities to try to convince us that we are each other's enemy. And so lots of relationship building at the speed of trust and consultation and learning one another's histories and traumas and pains is part of that. But that organization is, looking to move acres into our collective stewardship. And then there is the Black Farmer Fund, which is a finance vehicle finding non-exploitative ways to make capital available in the form of non-exploitative loans and grants to farm and food workers in the Northeast who are trying to be entrepreneurs, trying to establish themselves on land. There's the farmer training programs, the rural one at Soulfire Farm and the urban one at School NYC, that are supporting thousands of returning generation Black and brown growers to skill up on how to be on lands in a good way. There is Corbin Hill Food Project, which feeds 80,000 people every single year in the most vulnerable communities in New York City through a food hub model. So they're able to actually purchase food from our farmers, aggregate it, and distribute it to folks who need it. And then there's the Black Farmers United New York, which is the policy branch working like tirelessly to make sure that those conditions, that the soil is good for all of this to sprout and grow. And this is a very nascent network, but what's so powerful about it to me is that it's pushing beyond the idea that any one like individual or organization needs to have it all figured out, and starting to ask, how can we collaborate and put our puzzle pieces together so that truly that food system from sunshine to plate, that we have institutions that are coming from like a land and food sovereignty frame that are trying to hold those services for our community.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all so much. Really resonating with what you shared, like from channeling our divine discontent into agency to grow our own food and gardens and whatever land we have access to stop looking outside of ourselves and really turning to people we're in community with. I was really feeling that image of seeds as long lost prisoners of war coming home, and rehydrating our reciprocal relationships with seeds, as Sister Rowan said, and centering culture and spirit. And Leah, thank you for uplifting the powerful and important relationship and network building work across difference to move acres into stewardship to Black and Indigenous people that have been dispossessed from land, and our own community finance vehicles and farmer trainings and food hubs. These are all really inspiring examples and stories. So thank you for uplifting them. And for this next question, I'm gonna pass it right back to you, Leah, to start us off. And it is, what are some of the obstacles to your mission, and what are ways that people who are listening can support?
Well, the empire is really powerful, right? So there are many, many obstacles, and I appreciate how Reverend Brown is getting us focused on our asset-based community development, because it can be quite overwhelming. Sometimes people have asked me, like, do you really believe that we're going to win, mostly in the context of climate chaos? And, the true answer is, I don't know. Really, I don't know. And also, I think we're all going to live much more honorably on this great blue earth if we behave as if we will win. So keeping that hope alive, and even knowing that we might not get to the mountaintop or see beyond it in our lifetimes, but thinking in generational returns rather than quarterly returns is really important. I would say that one of the many obstacles that we face is the savior complex, which I think is rooted in this idea that the folks who are most impacted by these issues of racial injustice in the food system don't know what we're doing or how to solve it. So the savior complex comes from this idea that someone outside of our communities needs to come tell us, educate us, instruct us, guide us, tell us what to do, and then that's how the problems will be solved. And this is confusing to me, because I know that if I personally want to be in allyship and work on issues of Islamophobia, I'm going to lean into the expertise of the Muslim community to tell me like what's going on and what needs to happen, right? If I want to work on the issues of the deep trauma that our veterans experience, PTSD and the mental health issues that come from being part of this war machine, I am going to lean into my comrades and family members who are veterans to say what is going on and what needs to happen. But sometimes folks get confused around race and somehow think that in Black, Indigenous, and other people of color communities, we need someone from the outside to come tell us how to make kale salad as part of our kindergarten curriculum, and that's what's going to solve it. And further, they'll write grants and pay themselves to do that in our communities, when in fact, like, we have the institutions, we have the answers, we have the ancestral knowledge, which is mostly ignored, appropriated, or under-resourced. And so I think that the solution comes when society is willing to transfer power, dignity, and resources to Black, Indigenous, and people of color leadership when it comes to solving these food issues.
Ashe, thank you, Leah. And can I pass it to you, Sister Rowan, for the same question? What are some of the obstacles to your mission, and how can people support?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, unfortunately and ironically, Indigenous peoples are some of the most invisible to the national eye, even though we are the original peoples of this land on Turtle Island.
Mm-hmm.
What we also have to remember is that as Indigenous peoples, as well as Black folk and other bodies of culture, that we already live in a post-apocalyptic reality. So we already survived an apocalypse. And so in some ways, we are more equipped to, we are already fortified. with that resilience and that adaptability in the face of climate change, because we've already been through it and are coming back stronger in lots of ways. Our communities struggle with resources, financial capital to rebuild facilities and farms that help them reclaim food waste traditions. We're not stuck in a past reality. We are amazing at carrying our ancestral brilliance forward, but also looking at the modern tools of science and technology and integrating them. Indigenous peoples have always, since forever ago, have always sort of metabolized and digest new things that came along and indigenized them for the benefit of our people, right? And so when we have grants and funding sources that have restrictions on how we can spend those funds, not on capital investments and capital infrastructure, that makes it really difficult. We have massive land loss that has impacted communities' abilities to hunt, forage, farm, and fish. And so how are we working in congruence and in solidarity with interculturally with other communities to ensure that we have the rights to be able to uphold our agreements to live as Indigenous peoples. Please feel free to visit nativefoodalliance.org and all of our social platforms to be able to see what we're doing. If you have visibility, amplify our efforts. If you have resources or funds, if you have volunteer skills and you want to get involved. What we don't need, as Sister Leah said, is saviorism. As our communities understand our vision, we just need the resources to nourish our dreams and visions of how this can happen. So we do need that amplification, though. But I will end on this note, which is that for those of you who are listening who inhabit white, cis, hetero, male bodies in agriculture, it's time for you to pass the mic. When we think about the blood memory, when we think about your blood memory, it's time for you to listen now. And it's time for BIPOC people, Black, Indigenous bodies of culture to be able to center our vision and thought leadership on what the future of food can be, because we have this radical remembering of what it was before, and we have this amazing capacity and creativity to dream what's possible on the horizon. And so how can we amplify that blood memory to be able to create a food system that we all are really invoking and wanting in this time? So yeah, pass the mic. And I'll pass the mic over to Reverend, because I'd love to amplify his voice and his vision.
So, it's not lost upon me how centrally the ancestors have factored into this conversation. And it feels like home. I'm grateful to be with you and discussing our ancestors. One of the things in terms of the obstacles related to that is there are times when I and those who I share community with have to resist the impulse or balance the energy to do the external work. And I in this moment point to it as an obstacle when that's out of balance and there's this driving impulse to consistently go, out of recognition of how gargantuan the challenges are. Let's just go every day, let's just do. And in this moment, I'm recognizing how that is one of the characteristics of white supremacy culture. This never-ending urgency. And then this society where our value is connected to our productivity. What did you produce? What did you do? And so I lift it up as an obstacle in this moment. That reflection is good, particularly reflection upon the ancestors, because I believe the ancestors know the way. And the more we sit with them, the more that we glean from the dynamic wisdom that they have to share. And so I want to call forward other ancestors, Reverend Albert Clegg Jr., Thomas Sankara, Kwame Nkrumah, Yaa Santawa, Queen Nanny of the Maroons. These ancestors know the way. And it might be a surprise to some, but I'm here to tell you, there's something Google don't know about. Google don't know everything. Our ancestors know some stuff, but we got to be still enough to listen and to hear their voice at a deeper level. In terms of how to support, blackchurchfoodsecurity.net is our website. Black Church FSN on Instagram and Twitter and the like. I just ditto everything that my siblings have shared about not needing a savior. And let me also just say, I'm not sure if we want your support. We need to have relationship first. So we want to sit together. Let's eat. Who your mama and them? Who your grandmama and them? Where your cousins? I just want to lift up how relationship is important, because this is a marathon of my life, and I don't want to invite somebody in who might have the right check, but they've not done some work. So we got to do some journeying together. So I would say that's how you can support. Commit to do that work and come alongside, because I'm not here to do that work for you. No, none of us can do that work for one another.
Yes, y'all. Thank you so much. I hope y'all were listening closely, because we just got some real instructions, and I'm so moved by this message, you know, really transferring resources, power, and dignity and land to BIPOC-led initiatives and formations to amplify efforts and nourish the dreams and visions of these leaders. And yes, to call in our ancestors. We are not alone in this. And as Sister Rowan said, we have survived so much already and have so much to learn from. And I'm going to ask my last question to our amazing panelists. And I want to invite those of you who are listening to also be thinking of the questions that you're holding in your heart for these experts, these leaders. And you can feel free to put those questions in the chat, and we'll get to some of those following this. And the last question I'm holding is a desire to hear a lesson or a teaching from your work that you want to pass on that feels especially relevant for these times. And I'd love to pass it to you, Sister Rowan, to start us off.
Absolutely. I think what I want to do in this moment is really just call us all in. You know, we're all here connecting with our hearts and our minds. I want us to all remember that not a single one of us is untouched by the grief disconnection of these times, right? And that each one of us in this circle, both on the panel and those of you who are listening, have ancestral brilliance and agreements and memories that run like wild rivers in your blood and your bones. And so many of us have ancestors who have endured incredible adversities and prayed so that we descendants would have good foods to nourish us and an understanding of the relationships that we need to sustain us. So the time to start is now. It can be something like a tiny little seed, right? It doesn't have to be big. You know, if each one of us apprentices ourselves to the land, to a seed that fed our ancestors, to that deep inner knowing, to carve out that space, as the Reverend said, to listen to that ancestral brilliance that is inside of us, then we will spark the revolution that's needed for us to be able to hand a bundle down to our children that's better than the one that we received, right? And that's the call of these times, is to be those good future ancestors and those responsible descendants. And it starts small. It's not huge work. It's just, reconnecting and rehydrating and remembering that we have that. And so may we not be defined by our intergenerational trauma, because many of us struggle with that day in, day out. But may we be animated by our ancestral brilliance in this time to remember that. And every single one of us in the circle, no matter what your skin color is, no matter what your cultural background, you have ancestral brilliance that is inside your body. And there's been this Wedigo, this spiritual virus that has been working its way, throughout the globe, getting us to disconnect and think that we can be self-sufficient, or that we can be individuals, working for ourselves over collective care. And so now is the time to reconnect to that, and to sit on this precipice, on this edge of incredible transformation that we're in, to apprentice ourselves to the tiny little small beings who are disrupting things and helping us to remember what really matters. Start there, and do this work, do this deep work, and may we be, in an honor of that grand lineage of those who came before us, may we make renewed commitment for those yet to come. Down you go.
Thank you for the poetry and brilliance from your heart, Sister Rowan. I am full of chills and goosebumps and gratitude. Reverend Brown, would you like to go next?
Naima, I'm going to go ahead and be honest. I forgot the question. Sister Rowan just put me so deep in. I'm over here rocking. I'm catching the spirit over here in my room. So.
You know?
I understand. The question I have for you is if you could share a lesson or a teaching from your work that you want to pass on to all of us who are listening.
So I'll say we had discussion about Reverend in front of my name before we started. And my sister Leah was like, hey, there's no Reverend there. And I have started, normally I would just say, you know, it's whatever, Heber is fine. But Leah was right. And I asked them to put Reverend in front of my name. Why? Well, because Christianity, colonial Christianity, has done such damage to the globe, has done such damage to African people. Christianity has been a handmaiden to white supremacy in so many ways, of this perverting of the followers of the way of Yeshua. And it's important to me now to make sure y'all know that a Black Baptist preacher named Heber from Baltimore is here in this room sharing space with you and in this circle. And I'm not alone, that there are many other pastors, religious leaders, ministers, and churches who recognize and acknowledge the harm done by Christianity and the church. And let me say, done by a perverted colonial version of the way of Yeshua. And this is a time for that acknowledgement. And is the time for reconnecting with our great ancestor, Yeshua, in a way that is not partner to domination and legacies of domination and exploitation as well. So the lesson that I'm learning and I've learned is that as faith-based organizations, whether churches or synagogues or mosques and the like, as we acknowledge the ways that we've done harm, or there's harm in the legacies of your church, there's harm somewhere in that legacy. This is an opportunity to be transformed. We preach about repentance and baptism, don't we? This is that opportunity. So I'm inspired by that opportunity and the lessons that I'm seeing and learning from pastors all over the country and Black farmers and Black pastors who are pointing to another way that we can pursue and to follow. And we'll see where the road leads, but I'm excited to be on it step by step.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Amen. Wow, I have tears in my eyes, Reverend Brown. So you know this, but Naima and I are double PKs. We got two preacher parents. And I've never said this in public, but I will say that one of the reasons I left Christianity is because of exactly what you're talking about. I'm a practitioner of Ifa, Vodun, of our ancestral ways. But if I had had a reverend like you in my life who was willing to take accountability for that history and willing to really look at what is that true gospel, that would have been a different relationship with the church. So you're just like changing my whole life right now. But to answer the question that you asked, Naima, I had a conversation with our mother recently who's just heartbroken by the lateral violence in our movement. And she said that the biggest difference she sees between the civil rights movement and the movements that we have right now is that she doesn't see where the love is in our current movement. And because I'm not like Sister Rowan, I don't have my own poems. I'm going to read somebody else's poem that I think speaks to this yearning for us to do our work with love. This is a Khalil Gibran poem that I just want to end with. It means a lot to me. He wrote, "And what is it to work with love? It is to weave the cloth with threads drawn from your heart, even as if your beloved were to wear that cloth. It is to build a house with affection, even as if your beloved were to dwell in that house. It is to sow seeds with tenderness and reap the harvest with joy, even as if your beloved were to eat the fruit. And it is to charge all things you fashion with a breath of your own spirit, and to know that all the blessed dead are standing about you and watching. Often have I heard you say, as if speaking in sleep, He who works in marble and finds the shape of his own soul in the stone is nobler than he who plows the soil. And he who seizes the rainbow to lay it on a cloth in the likeness of a person is more than she who makes the sandals for our feet. But I say, not in sleep, but in the over-wakefulness of noontide, that the wind speaks not more sweetly to the giant oaks than to the least of all the blades of grass. And she alone is great who turns the voice of the wind into a song made sweeter by her own loving. Work is love made visible. And if you cannot work with love, but only with distaste, it is better that you should leave your work and sit at the gate of the temple and take alms of those who work with joy. For if you bake bread with indifference, you bake a bitter bread that feeds but half a person's hunger. And if you grudge the crushing of the grapes, your grudge distills a poison in the wine. And if you sing, though, as angels and love not the singing, you muffle a person's ears to the voices of the day and the voices of the night.
Ashe. Thank you each for your spiritual leadership. I'm deeply moved, as are the people who are listening. There are so many comments of affirmation and gratitude pouring in for the wisdom of this panel and the wisdom of our ancestors that are also pouring through. And we are now in the moment where we're gonna have some questions from audience members, and I will share them and invite us to popcorn style, jump into the ones that we feel moved to answer, okay? The first question from the audience is regarding how we can integrate food sovereignty and justice into our jails and prisons. Food is medicine, and access to nourishing food is often not an option for our incarcerated siblings. So how do we work to change this while also working for total abolition?
I can speak to that a little bit. So I think something to recognize in the backdrop of the carceral state and mass incarceration is that it is very much rooted in this history of oppression of Black people in particular. And the 13th Amendment, as folks know, has a loophole that allows people to be enslaved if they've been convicted of a crime. And if you go back to 1865, without too much of a history lesson, the Black codes were these new set of laws put on the books to make it illegal to loiter, which is to hang around if you're Black, illegal to be a vagrant, which is to not have a job if you're Black, to make it illegal to be not industrious and honest, the punishment for which was to have your children taken away and apprenticed to their former masters, which is the beginning of CPS and the state taking away Black people's children. And we acknowledge a parallel insidious and horrible genocidal history with Indigenous communities as well of having children stolen. But this is not over. In 2019 and 2020, we see the highest levels since 1900 of Black people being put on the plantation to work for free to bring in our food, right? And this is just one example of the many, many examples of corporations taking advantage of neo-slavery of prison labor. And this is also happens in terms of who's fighting the fires, who's getting the products to Whole Foods, who's making the furniture. And I think we need to, foundationally, if we want to look at justice, we need to end that system of neo-slavery. We need to end penal farms and the exploitation of labor. And then the fact that the throwaway food goes to reservations, the throwaway food goes to our schools, and the throwaway food goes to prisons, it needs to fundamentally shift. Our very, very best food, our very best harvest and produce of the land needs to go to our most beloved, which is to say to all of us. And that is going to require a restructuring of the Farm Bill, of the USDA, and the entire food system. And we're here for it. We're here for it for the long haul.
Thank you so much, Leah. Do either of you want to speak to this question, or do you want to take a new one?
I mean, I'll just speak to it, I think, from a little bit of a different angle, which is through the lens of healing. Many of our Indigenous and Black and Brown relatives have fallen victim to a very, a carceral system that's very unjust and targets those people unfairly. One of my elders, Steve McCumber, who's one of my original sort of seed uncles, who really took me under his wing and helped me to uncover the foods and seeds of my ancestors, actually works in a federal prison across the border in Canada. And he works with Indigenous inmates to restore their connection to their cultural and spiritual lineage, as well as working with them, in ways of getting their hands in the earth and getting them invigorated to carry those skills and that way of moving in the world once they move beyond those walls. And so again, I do think about the healing nature of creating spaces, healing spaces that enable those brothers and sisters to connect in meaningful ways to their cultural inheritance, so that as they move into the world, they're strong in spirit and heart. And part of that work really helps them to, again, digest, metabolize, and heal that PTSD and trauma that comes from, being a victim of that inequity. So I just want to speak to that.
Appreciate that so much. All right, we're getting a few more questions, so I'm going to jump to the next one, and I'll combine these two. It's great. Folks are really wanting to know how they can support this BIPOC-led movement for food, land, and seed sovereignty. And folks want to know, one, if there is an Indigenous-led or land-back organization to support. And I'll also combine that with a question that's around, for folks who are white and cisgender who want to support the land back movement, how to go about that without venturing into white savior mode. Whoever wants to start.
I think we can uplift a lot of our different, Indian Collective is one that comes to mind in terms of ways in which there's a leveraging of rematriation of land back, of resources back to Indigenous communities that's fully and completely Indigenous led. I know that NEFOC, Northeast Farmers of Color, is co-led, right, by an Indigenous woman, Stephanie Morningstar. I don't know if you want to speak to a little bit of that, Leah, but I know that the Indian Collective, NDN, the letters NDN Collective, is a good place to start. Leah, do you want to speak to NEFOC or?
Well, I think we should center the organizations that are entirely Indigenous-led and working on this work, since that was the question, and really that's what the Land Back movement is. I know Sogorea Land Trust is another organization that's working on that in the Bay, and there's probably many more, and forgive my ignorance for not being able to list them.
Yeah, again, there's also a lot of different angles. I grew up in the land sovereignty movement because my father's an attorney who does work for land and water rights for Indigenous peoples. So there also are legal defense funds such as Native American Rights Fund and other entities that also help to restore, Indigenous treaty rights, fishing rights, land rights and water rights too. So we can't forget that as well. But there's also advocacy that needs to happen on that federal level to really reclaim and look at some of the broken treaties, etc. So Native American Rights Fund is also a good place. There's a lot of different organizations we can uplift.
Absolutely. Thank you for naming those. And
I'm adding them to a list and following them all right now to make sure to amplify these efforts. So thank you, Mr. Rowe.
And Reverend Brown, if you want to add anything about what it looks like to not perpetuate the white savior complex, but to be in solidarity with Black-led movements, feel free.
Sure. I would say, there's a lot of work that must be done. I think what Leah said a little bit earlier really resonates. Everything Leah says resonates. But Leah earlier talked about, if you are trying to learn about something or a topic or issue, you go to that community and you sit and you listen. And so I think that could be a good start right there, just showing up and establishing relationship, to be invited into spaces where your only agenda is to listen. Your only agenda is to listen, and to listen for what's already going on in that community and get behind that. Don't bring your agenda, don't bring your project, don't bring your research, don't bring nothing you're trying to do. That community already is working on stuff. If you are so fortunate as to be invited into circle, listen, And then where your hands can get behind what it is that's already been established, where you can puff some wind into the sails that already have been erected, as that is invited, start there. Start right there. And I think it takes a lot for those who are used to being, those who've succumbed to the illusion and the fallacy of white superiority. It takes a lot to show up in a different posture. But the more you show up in that posture where you are not the expert, you are not the thought leader, you are not the person resourcing, supporting, none of that. You're showing up to listen first and then take instruction. I think more and more, those muscles start to get stronger and stronger, and probably will ripple out into other aspects of your life as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that so much. And I want to uplift a really incredible resource that is the result of hundreds of conversations with Black and Indigenous and other people of color, formations, land stewards, agricultural workers, that Soulfire Farm developed. It's a multi-page document of action steps that are divided into categories from reparations and rematriation to dignity for farm workers, to policy actions, to institutional purchasing power, and things that we can do for our continued self-awareness and education. And we'll drop the link in the chat. It's available at soulfirefarm.org/take-action. Again, soulfirefarm.org/take-action. And as Leah said earlier, you know, the quote of her daughter, that the food system is the sum of everything it takes to bring sunshine onto our plates, which means that there are so many ways that we can intervene, so many opportunities to really make a difference in healing the food system and redistributing land, agency, and power. So thank you for that. And we have time for one more question that has come from our audience. And it's, I actually want to try to blend these two themes for y'all to speak to what inspires you. And it's a question about ancestry from someone that doesn't have a significant trace of Native blood in their ancestry and feels a sense of loss when it comes to connecting to ancestors, you know, and rather feels anger in connecting to knowing ancestors were probably colonizers. So how is it that we can define ancestry, especially for people that are struggling to connect to theirs? And another question really came in about, you know, how to cultivate beloved community, and this person is doing a seed exchange. But I bring those together because I feel like our sense of community is partially about recognizing our ancestors as part of our community. So I bring those questions together for final comments.
I would just like to say to that we're all in a time of reckoning with the violence that's come before us, right? And so not one of us is untouched by the evils of empire and imperialism, right? And so we all, BIPOC people don't get a free pass either. We have plenty of internalized, you know, oppression and things we need to work through, right? So trauma begets trauma, you know, and I have a wise elder who said, don't just call somebody, word I can't probably say, you know, a butthole, you know, but find out why they were that way. You have to find out why they were that way. And maybe some of you guys will be your ancestors' worst nightmares. And that's a blessing because you're changing and breaking intergenerational curses, you know, because again, but the work of the time is to look at the places where you have cultural superiority and begin to unpack that superiority and that supremacy inside yourself so that you can become a descendant worth descending from, if that makes sense. So how are we doing the work ourselves to digest and metabolize that trauma like compost, right? We're composting those past failures so seeds can sprout from the soil that stands beneath our feet. And that's, you know, that's it. You know, we all have ancestors that were problematic and some that were wise and amazing, and we just have to reckon with that. So all of us.
Yes, and we're in partnership with the earth every day to compost and transmute it into something new. Yeah. Ashe, thank you all so much. This was incredibly deep, powerful, enlightening, illuminating. I'm so grateful that we're in this work together. And in this time of intensifying violence and climate calamity, we know every seed saved will set us free. Thank you.
Every seed saved will set us free.
Ashe. Thank you.
Best panel ever. Thank you.
Deep, deep gratitude to each of you.